Hey everyone, I recently got a comment in one of my videos asking for me to try sculpting Popeye, so I thought I'd do that for you here today. Popeye, he's a lot of fun because he's a lot of just kind of basic geometric shapes that are just kind of pushed and pulled around to effect. So as I start off all my sculpts, I kind of get some basic geometry for the forms and just start blocking out his overall shape and pose. I'm going to challenge myself a little bit here and not really rely on symmetry too much. So I'm going to give him an asymmetrical pose. It's going to be a little bit more challenging. But one of the pieces that's pretty distinct with Popeye is his big, beefy forearms. And I know I'll use that twice. So before I go completely asymmetrical, I'm going to start here and work up one of his forearms that I'll then duplicate and then put into place. So you can see I just created a sphere, pulled it around, and just moved it up above his head just to give myself some working area. And I'm using the tube tool to start blocking in the fingers. The tube tool is great for doing fingers, arms, legs, those sorts of things. So once I get the fingers kind of positioned the way I like them, I build up the knuckles and then I remesh. So I've got the remeshing on. Next thing I'm going to have to do is start refining the form and the shape of his hand. And that's a lot of kind of turning it around, remeshing it, reshaping it. I'm still working on the pose for the thumb and just kind of making sure I'm getting that right here. A good idea anytime you're working with hands is to just pose your own hand and take a look at it. It's really quick and easy reference. So some of the times when you see the video kind of pausing here, that's probably because I'm just looking at my own hand for a little bit and studying it. So here I'm using some of the flatten tool to kind of really push the geometry and define shape of the forms and the fingers. And you can see one of the disadvantages of remeshing is it basically fills in the gaps between the fingers. They're no longer treated separately. So just be aware that when you do remesh, you're kind of committing to those fingers and it gets kind of harder to separate them if you decide you want to do that later. But I don't plan on doing much with them later. You know, this isn't going to be a model I'm animating or anything, so it's just fine for me. Sometimes I find it's a little bit easier actually to work with them all kind of meshed together. And I even spent a little bit of time between the thumb and the index finger, just making sure there's actually no air gap in there. This also helps for when you 3D print something. You want something that's airtight, doesn't have any big gaps or holes in the model. All right, so I'm going to label that. I'm pretty happy with the way that looks. Okay, so I'm going to move this into place. And you see, I actually I duplicated the arm and moved one into place and then unhit it, move the other into place. So I like to start with kind of where the hands are and the forearms are before worrying about the upper arms. So now I'm just using the tube tool to then connect the shoulders to the forearms. The trick with designing in 3D is having a good silhouette, good pose from all angles. So I'm constantly kind of turning around and trying to make sure you can see those clear lines of actions in the arms and in the back and in the head, the neck, all that stuff from different angles. And really, I kind of continue to fight with that throughout this whole piece. Popeye has a lot of really fun, interesting angles on him that really have a strong line of action. All right, so you can see, so I use the tubes to do the upper arms, but I'm using just spheres to block in his legs. Pretty happy with that, where all that is. I'm adding a sphere. I'm going to start blocking in the hat, just using two spheres, one for the front bulk and one for the back. I'm adding some spheres to block in the ears next. So you can see already he's really looking a lot like Popeye, and for the most part, I just have some spheres and cylinders in here that are just pushed and pulled around, with the exception of my forearms, which are really the only pieces I have detailed right now. Kind of push in the area for the ears. And now I'll use a sharp brush to kind of work in the detail for his eyes and his brows. This is a lot of fun. So I'm pretty happy with the overall shape of the face and just going in and creating that fun line art detail in the face with the sharp brush. We'll do similarly for the nose. Add some bulk in there and use the sharp brush to create the creases in the nose. Add some creases in the ears for the ear detail. Once again, I'm continuing to go through and kind of tweak the pose as I go. I'm going to take the hat and kind of cant it to one side. We'll add another sphere here for the brim. And I very quickly, I don't know if you saw that, I used the trim tool to kind of chop it off in half so I can get a flat base on that brim. And then I pushed and pulled it around a little bit. Now I'm adding a cylinder for the band that goes around the base of the hat. And very quickly, I mess with remeshing and kind of smoothing things out. There may be a better way to create creasing and then subdivide, but I'm not really sure exactly how to do that yet in Nomad, if there is. If you do know a better way to take a cylinder and very quickly like subdivide it with keeping the top and bottom crease, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear any tips. If there's anything you're like, wow, you should do this, it'd be a lot easier if you did it this way, feel free to comment below. I'm no master at this stuff. I just enjoy doing it a lot. All right, so now I've used the clay buildup tool to increase the bulk around his shoulders. Continuing to mess with that pose. Popeye has actually a very, very long torso. And I lowered his lower half some so I could give him a longer torso here. Continuing to push and pull and tweak the forms of the legs. And you can see with one of those legs, I went ahead and remeshed it because I was happy with where that was and just smoothed out the area of the knee and where the crease was. That's really the trick here, is you want to get the forms as happy as you can be with them, and then you remesh and go from there. Similarly to how I mentioned with the fingers, is once you remesh, any part where two appendages are kind of touching each other, it gets hard to go back and edit those appendage pieces individually. So again, you got to get really happy with your primary forms before you remesh. And then I just use, again, the draw sharp brush, sometimes the crease tool. They're pretty similar in how they act. It's really just kind of getting a feel for what you like best. All right, now I'm taking a sphere, getting it in place for the foot, and then using the trim tool to cut a flat in the foot. And then I'll use the select rectangle tool to get kind of that band around the shoe. And then I push and pull things in. So there's just a nice little lip there at the base of the shoe. And here you see I actually use the crease tool at the bottom of the leg to get that wrinkle where the pant wrinkles up around the foot. Try to keep everything labeled. Sometimes I forget to do that, but you really got to get in the habit of taking the time to label your layers, because very quickly you can turn around and you'll have like 50 layers named sphere or cylinder. It can get really confusing really quick. So for this other shoe, I just duplicated and then mirrored it, put it into place, and then I selected half of the shoe, blurred my selection a few times, and then rotated it using the gizmo to get that shoe into place. Now I'm just using the clay buildup tool and the sharp brush to kind of build up the wrinkles. So nothing really new here, just using the sharp brush, regular brush, move tool, just pushing and pulling forms, just refining things, smoothing it out, trying to get things to have a really good silhouette from different angles. You know, usually I like to build up the forms around the crease areas because that's where the fabric bunches up. Let me quickly add a cylinder here, remesh it, and then push and pull it around for a belt. And then I'll pull the fabric up around it and kind of bunch it up where that belt pushes up his shirt. All right, I'll use the trim tool to cut in a shape at the back of the shoe, and then use the sharp brush to kind of dial in those forms on the back of the shoe. Again, just tweaking here. Mess with the knobs on his elbows. All right, now I'm going to turn off the forearms, just hide them, so I can get better access to his chest, where I'll use the sharp brush to draw in his collar. I'll go around it with the clay buildup tool to kind of build up the forms and kind of add some depth there. And I'll also use the sharp brush tool on sub, so that way it kind of pulls out the edges and kind of makes the edges sharp around it. I'll do that same technique for the outer edges of the collar. Now I could do this as a separate piece of geo, and to some degree that would be better in some cases, but I thought sometimes it's just easier to use that as sculpted or model detail, especially when I'm not really doing much beyond just a single pose. I'm not using it for animation or anything like that. So in this case, it's just fine to just add that as sculptural detail to the torso rather than create it as a separate piece. Also kind of bunch up the fabric around his chest, and then I'll add some spheres very quickly for the buttons and flatten out the fronts of those. Continue to work in detail around here, just refining things. I'm getting really close, just adding some extra secondary wrinkles and forms just to really sell the idea that there's fabric that's being bunched up and pushed around here. Just adjusting my ears and just other things, continuously looking at things from other angles. So now I'm going to add the pipe. The pipe's simply a tube, or actually a cylinder that I've got stretched out for the stick of the pipe, and then another cylinder that I quickly remeshed and smoothed the bottom of to round it out. And then I'll mask out the top, switch to the gizmo tool and push it in, remesh it, smooth it out. And that's basically the pipe. That's all that's really needed for that. All right, now I'm going to add the last pieces to the model, which are going to be the sleeve cuffs. They're simply just some toruses, or tori, however that's said, just put into place right around the ends of his sleeves. Getting really close here, I want to make sure everything is labeled as well as I can, so it's easy to navigate around. I'm going to go ahead and tilt his hat some more, just continue to push that pose. I almost forgot, he has two little hairs just sticking out from below his hat. I'll add those in as tubes, get them posed around, remesh, and use the pinch brush to make them a little sharper towards the tip, and rename them. I'm going to add a little bit of a bulk of the lip where the pipe comes out of, and go back in and further refine the detail of his face. I'm going to use the flatten tool around his brows to really make that detail stand out and contrast a little bit more. And then I'm going to mask off just the stripe around his collar and push and pull that in just to give it some depth. That's something I will be painting as well, but for now I just want to give it some nice geometry, so that way even the uncolored model, you can see the detail in there. I'll smooth that out, getting really close here. I'm going to go ahead and remesh the neck into the body so I don't have a hard crease there. And now I'm going to go through and start coloring my objects. Just like I've done in my other videos, I select the object, I go through, do a paint all, change the color, paint all, change the color, paint all. With the exception of the torso, where because I don't have the geometry separated out, I have to go in and manually paint those different pieces. Same with the face. When I'm painting the blacks here, I'm also turning the roughness all the way up on my material value so I don't get any weird specular highlights that I don't want. Just trying to get a nice, flat, dark, kind of ink work sort of look to those black areas. Next up, get the pants in there, all colored, just one by one. I'm adding some metallicness to the material on the buttons. And you just have to be conscious when you're painting, you know, which values, if you're painting the roughness or the metallicness or not. Usually I don't like to do that. I'll just do a paint all on those areas. All right, now I had to hide all the other geo so I can get a good angle at painting the collar in here. All right, here he is, all colored. I can't forget his anchor tattoos. So for those, I had to actually increase the remesh resolution so it wasn't terribly pixelated. I probably could have subdivided maybe one more time to get more resolution there. And actually, I say remesh, but really I can, at that point, just take the model and just subdivide it to get the geometry that I need to get the tattoos in there. Now we'll do my typical 3-point lighting setup. Get a key and a fill and a rim. As usual, my rim is usually the most intense, so I can get a nice strong highlight on the side of the model. Part of the trick here is kind of knowing where you want your model viewed from and where you want it lit from. I'm going to go ahead and add a cylinder for a ground here so we can get some nice shadows on the floor. And you can see I'm already starting to play with the post-process effects. One of the coolest post-process effects here in Nomad is using the curvature and giving them sort of a toon outline. Here you can see the final turnaround in Nomad. I hope you liked it. At the end, I'll add in a nice pan of my Blender render where I've gone in and I've added more texture and detail and shading. And so here is the Blender render. I hope you guys like this one. If you'd like to see me model something else, just let me know in the comments below. Until then, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys later.